don't you feel that all this extra energy that is being put into your larger system, whether it is training or organizational work or stuff like that, is affecting in a way or pushing you from an observer position to a more active and central position?
My way of translating my way of translating your question is actually from the beginning. I'm not so sure of myself. I sort of have basic humble position, but actually it's a disqualifying position. I don't recognize myself as I see sometimes others recognizing what you're saying, you know. And I think it's great because it keeps, you know, the possibility of my ego getting really bloated or working from an ego position. So it's actually helped me. Now I'm gradually noticing there's much more recognition and more recognition, and I'm sort of scared of it because it may get me into what you may say called an actor's position, or okay, here I am and this and that, and much more from an ego standpoint, really watching out. So in a way, I'm looking at this recognition and I see myself applying the self-doubts, you know, do I really deserve all this attention and so on and so forth, which I think is kind of healthy, and at the same time it's kept me from going out there and pushing and saying I got it and I know it and let's go, you know, being really assertive about what I think I know or what I think I can do and so on. So it's useful and self-defeating in a way, because I think I could have accomplished a lot more if I had a bigger ego, you know, in the past. At the same time, the self-doubt has really served my coaching position, you know, so I'm kind of in between there.
We're exactly at the point where I didn't even know I wanted to go, but it's a lot of us out there, whether we're entrepreneurs or coaches or parents or whatever, we're going through this exact kind of cycle where, you know, if you don't own part of your ego, you might get to disqualify yourself and take away from some resources from what you could achieve. But at the same time, if you go into that posture, you
lose yourself.
Yeah. It's a role. And I guess the question of this is, could you give a concrete example where you kind of went through this loop?
Well, in practically all the work I do, I mean, you come very often with people with egos or resistance or whatever, and at some point you could say, you know, am I really right? You know, what's this pushback? You know, facing this, I have to check my convictions and really put the energy for the system or whatever that's giving me the pushback. And see, you know, is it really justified to put so much energy to challenge, you know, when you're getting so much pushback? And what's a normal, you know, system that's resisting because it just doesn't want to change? And what is it part of the, you know, where does it become, you know, my ego that's doing it? And basically, I would say if I can leave the situation and just forget it. You know, I put a lot of energy into it, but I leave the situation, just forget it. I don't have so much doubts. But if I have lingering feelings about it, then I have some questioning to do. You know, in other words, words, my checkpoint is my own what feelings afterwards.
Capacity to leave it behind.
Yeah, you know.
So is it you decide if you leave it behind or not, or you just observe if you've left it behind?
Yeah,
or
yeah,
you
it's
just
more
observe?
than a second. In other words, I could be in a very tough relationship and put a lot of energy, and then I get up and go to the bathroom and do other things, and it's not even there, you know.
Yeah. I mean,
Or I'm joking the next minute, even with the same person. And then I feel okay, you know, I'm not involved
Yeah.
in this. I'm just putting the energy because the situation calls for it.
Okay.
For instance, if somebody starts raising his voice, I had raised my voice too, you know, what the hell. That's when I really put the energy as if I was really pissed. And
Yeah.
and then it's off. So,
Okay.
so I feel it's much more contextual. You know, and with the next person, I'm completely different. Now it does have some negative side effects in a way, because if I'm with three people, and with one of the people, I have to put a lot of the energy. I don't have to with the others, but the others may say, "Whoa! If he did this with me, I'd be really scared." So they put on me. I think this guy's dangerous. I wouldn't do that with them.
Yeah.
You know, so they sort of transfer behavior that is not
Directed to them.
intended towards them at all. On the contrary, but they're imagining it could be. So it affects others' relationships when they witness this.
I can confirm that 100%. It's happening throughout your trainings the last years. Even in the same training, when I know people, I always call for feedback, and it's the precise nuance I'm looking for. You know, because the method and everything else, they all confirm it. But you have these opposite kind of, you know, there's people who have seen you for what you are and then understood your interfaces and the reason for those interfaces. There's other people who mistake those interfaces for who you are.
Well, it triggers something in them.
Yeah.
And so, but they don't notice that, you know, with one person they can be really challenging and tough and so on and so forth, and next I'm crying. You got my tear going down, and you know, because it's a completely different relationship. Now, when they start noticing this, and usually it takes a little bit of time, then they'll know that I won't treat them the same way as others, and so on.
And this brings me back at what you were saying about not the method being the main thing, but the relationship. Even for Jungian therapy and for all these methods that have been developed throughout time, the method itself is not as important
as the real relationship with each, you know.
And that's where I'm coming to education.
Oh, okay.
And I'm starting to get more and more experience with kids in education. And the more I work with them, the more truth I find to what you said. It's not the system, it's not the way, it's not the method, it's the relationship you're able to create. My question is, how do we train people to create that relationship? Because teachers right now, they're abusing without us being able to accuse them in any way, because that's the system and that's the way they work. But they're abusing children through the methods they're having.
Well, in abuse, I mean, you have to see that they were trained with abuse.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, so the trouble today, in a way, is we're shifting educational systems, and the people who are doing the education are from an old system, and the type of education that becomes more and more necessary needs to come from people who haven't been in the old system in a way. You know, for kids, I mean, they have been raised by parents who have been raised by the old system. So the parents went to a school and succeeded and did what they needed to do in the old system by providing to the system what the system expected, and the system would, you know, really impose what they expect. So and so on. And all this works. Okay, so it's the old type of educational system, and so those kids have parents, and these parents sort of impose on the kids their ambitions. So if they see any kind of potential in a kid, they want the kid to really go in that potential. You know, whether it's sports or whatever, they suddenly become a freak
But that the parents are this one part, and again we have to look at their whole kind of.
yeah.
And then you have the teachers that are.
So when the kids go to the school, they get the same thing, and there's even a coalition between the parents and the teachers, you know, to get this kid to be whatever.
To put them on that, track which is
not
measurable.
only that, but to put them into the future they would have wanted to have. In other words, it's also, I mean, for some parents, is a lot of, well, from what I've seen, is they want to live their future through their children, you know, or their ambition through their children. In other words, if my kid really, really succeeds more than I did, that means I succeeded.
Validation for me.
It's a self-validation. So they'll try and live their own future or their own ambition through the kid. And the kid, of course, the child is going to get into this and forget what they want in a way, eventually.
And it's the same for all people involved in educating a kid. So even myself, when I go there, I find myself in the savior kind of role where I project my own validation, or I try to find my own validation in the progress they're making. And that's again, that's the type of responsibility that is not theirs, you know. And I think that's kind of what we need to train people to do, is be conscious of your freaking luggage, you know, and don't delegate it.
For me, there's a kind of thinking about this, which is actually the best education they can have is the education they give each other.
Yes.
In other words, the whole idea is to bring, to take out of the educational system the hierarchy. In other words, to start with a point of view that the older people, whether they're teachers or parents, etc., just need to watch out about a learning architecture in which kids raise each other. Okay? In other words, to be much more focused on helping the interfacing in a generation, so the generation can raise itself.
Yes.
Okay? And that's what I would call, really delegated learning. Now, you can't leave them to themselves. You need to be sure that the architecture is respected. So, but content-wise, that they grow themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, it's also to input possibilities where they could get content. In other words, be a sort of tutor, but not bring the content themselves and not push in the content. And if the kids start saying, okay, we don't want to go this way, we want to go that way, okay, how are you going to do it?
That's again, and when you say that exactly that part, when you're letting your client go, that's a level of trust in the system, or in the whatever you want to call it. It's knowing that it's okay. Even though I don't have control, I don't know where he's going, he might, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah. But it's really interesting because actually it's like coaching. In other words, if you take a kid who's 3-4 years old in a relatively normal environment, I mean, you can't stop them. They're full of energy. They want to explore everything. They're open to other people. They may even get in trouble or danger because they'll put their fingers in the plug or something like that. So you need to make sure the architecture is safe. But basically, if you let them go, they'll explore everything. Okay, this is a normal 3-4-year-old, etc. The world, the universe for them is positive, and they have huge energy. Now, if you take them at 18 and say, what do you want to do? And, I don't know. and so you can start saying, what's wrong? You know,
What's
what,
happening?
what did we do to kill that energy?
Yeah.
And for me, it reminds me of people in organizations that say, how can you motivate our people? You know, it's exactly the same thing. In other words, you put on such a lid
Yeah.
on the population that, of course, they're going to adapt to the lid.
Then you want them to be
play
creative.
the lid. In other words, you've killed everything that I wanted to do, so now you tell me what to do. You know, so they actually know how to delegate upwards very well. They delegate to the government, they delegate to the teachers, they delegate in the same way that they're delegating to the parents. You know, you told me to do what you want, so tell me what you want. You know, so we get into this paradox. The main function of the old education system is to train people to stop wanting things and just do what the factory wants, what the hierarchy wants. And so it's really difficult in a way to get the result of this kind of education and then put them in their room and then say, okay, you work together, you train each other together, etc., which is basically my strategy in coach education.
Which brings me to my next question. Didn't you ever feel the need to kind of go one level down in the, because I started with kids which are 15 and I feel like I need to go with two kids which are 13 and you know, catch them at an earlier stage where they're more flexible. Did you get that in any way in your work, or?
Well, my target and my work and the structure, you know, has always kept me working for professionals. I haven't, and in a way, you could say the most rigid system in any society is the educational system. You know, so I've been to a few, you know, parent-teacher meetings. Well, when you go to those parent-teacher meetings, basically the teachers want the parents to line up in a row in a room and behave like kids, and they want to tell the parents and so on and so forth. Teachers don't know how to deal with anything else. They've been trained to do this, even with adults. So they don't know how to handle adults, really. They don't, you know, if you get up in one of those teacher meetings and do something you know, that the rest of the crowd doesn't do, well, right away you attract all of his attention. They'll come to you and say, please sit down. You know? Because you're in, a kid doesn't just get up in the classroom and walk around. Come on, you know, what are you doing? Don't you understand?
Sit down and listen.
It's really regimented all the way. So one of the problems with the educational system is they're not trained to deal with adults. They have an issue about being adults with adults, or kids with kids.
Or
you know,
kids with kids.
in other words, being on the same level as the person in front.
It's one of the hardest things because it requires so much. You cannot train that. I feel you cannot just train that. Like, no matter, and I don't think you can train anything unless the person who's getting trained is really interested in developing that. But to be able to take yourself down to a kid's level, it's apparently simple, but it takes so much.
It's the same thing with adults.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see people coming to learn how to coach or what they want to know from you, what they have to do, and they learn what they have to do from you, hoping they'll pass the exam that you're going to do.
The same kind of.
So it's the same thing. And that's one of the dangers with coaching being institutionalized. Because it's getting to be more and more top-down with international exams and this, and people are going to fit into the system to become a coach that doesn't necessarily fit into the system. So it's becoming totally paradoxical. I mean, at some point, I can see the paradox where to pass some certification, you need to interview a client, and you need to demonstrate. You need to coach a client, and you need to demonstrate while you're coaching the client all the skills to pass the exam. Now the exam is institutional, but the client may not need those skills. If you don't demonstrate the skills with the client, you don't pass the certification.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, who's your real client when you're doing this? Actually, your real client is not the client; it's the institution. So it's as if in a company, headquarters asks for something, you drop everything. You do what the headquarters wants. The headquarters is the first client in an organization. Okay? Headquarters wants a PowerPoint. Headquarters wants next year's budget, etc. Drop everything. This becomes a priority. And it may take months. Okay, and this is the same thing that's happening in the coaching world.
Yeah, you're getting certified to answer some kind of criteria, not
that the
to
client
help
doesn't want.
the client.
So actually, real coaching is doing what the client wants. And now institutions are saying more and more, you don't do what the client wants until you've explained everything, the contract and so on. Well, with some clients, they don't want the explanation. They have an issue, they want it solved in 2 minutes. Okay, so the first thing you do is say, okay, let's go and move and solve, and you establish the contract afterwards. Okay?
There's a lot of paradoxes that people perceive in your training. Is like sometimes he says, don't interrupt and leave the space, and sometimes he says, just interrupt right away. And that's what it's about. It's not the method. It's you be there, and if you're there, you'll know, okay, you need the method, you need the training for it to be kind of in your mental space, but the decision is not mental. The decision is you connect to your client and you give it what you feel. And sometimes you mess it up. It's not always the right thing to do.
But that's the paradox of training. For instance, of riding a bike or learning how to ride a bike. If you want to learn, you have to focus on what you're doing. Okay, so you're going to focus on holding the handlebars, and you have to think about pedaling and so on, and basically get momentum, so that in momentum you'll be able to work your equilibrium. But if you don't get momentum, you'll never work your equilibrium. So you have to take risks. How? Well, you have to focus on what you're doing, on each technique and so on, which is completely contradictory with, finding your equilibrium and momentum and getting into the flow. So in a lot of the training, I'm actually completely different from a coach. I'm not a coach, I'm almost military trainer. In other words, do this, do it 100 times until it gets into your blood, and then you can do whatever you want. Now, they don't understand that once you're trained, you actually don't do anything consciously. You just go with the flow. Right?
Yeah, that's the missing part,
But in the training, so the whole paradox of being a trainer in a field where you go with the flow, it's like bicycling, actually, or it's like life. But to go with the flow, you have to get out of the training context.
And the control that the training context gives you.
Yeah.
And the illusion of control. You mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned that if you would have had a bigger ego, you would have probably accomplished more. And when you mean accomplished more.
What I was saying is if I was more sure of myself.
In a way.
Okay.
So
no, more sure of myself I associate with having a bigger ego. I've always had my convictions, which kept me, going on the same track and so on. But these were more concerning me, not necessarily concerning the whole environment and universe. So going out there and saying my convictions applied to you or applied to reality, etc., I could just as well have been much more introverted in my own world with my convictions. They're not really a problem. I could probably go to live in a very small city and farm and things and be very satisfied with myself and my convictions. Now, where it's been very slow for me to do my coming out.
Okay.
In other words, really gradually see that these apply. And when I saw it, I was okay, but not all the play. So slow at thinking that actually could be really appreciated, and actually people want it, and actually, so if I had been convinced or had recognition earlier or whatever, maybe I would have built much bigger of a sort of empire
in terms of impact and
really.
What would the precise message you would tell your 40-year-old self about coming on this area, like a linguistically precise message? What would that be?
Well, I would say you don't need so much reassurance. You could have done the same thing faster.
Would you get it? Because I'm talking linguistics. That's why I mentioned linguistics, because I'm looking at the message that you could, maybe kind of perceive unconsciously from your older self when you're 40. That would, change that that rhythm you come out of. Would make you change that. It would encourage you to change.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I don't know if I had done anything differently, if I would have gone as deeply. In other words, if my concern was a little more extroverted in developing and spreading and so on, I wouldn't have focused on going deeper and deeper and deeper in a limited perimeter. I never really concerned myself, for instance, with putting a lot of energy in associations of consultants and trainers and spreading the word and so on, or even getting elected and playing a public role, etc., etc. It wasn't my concern. My concern was more focusing on my clients and doing my stuff in my perimeter and developing it. If I had put more energy outwards, would have I gone as deep developing what I developed? So
it's clear. What I'm getting out of this is that you're exactly where you are supposed to be. Because
that could be the conclusion. It's very reassuring. but in a way, I'm more of a researcher than a salesman. And so if somebody doesn't buy, okay, and I hope somebody will see what I'm developing and want it, and they come trickling in.
Yeah.
Okay. To develop the Metasystem in Romania, it's been 15 years. Okay. Well, we started when there was a crisis, which was healthy actually, because it limited the people who came and made a selection, and then after the crisis, people came for different reasons. And so, but developing something like this over 15 years is quite a long time. We're coming to a point now in Romania where, it's on a roll, and we can, be more selective and stuff like that. But and there's enough competition to attract some of the others, so I can attract more selectively. It could have been developed in 5 years.
Yeah.
But then
But it's
that
it's
15 years helped distill what I'm doing.
That's it. And it's again, it brings me to something I'm going through fairly often, which is, am I doing as much as I could? Is the impact, like when I wake up late, if these 2 hours that I've slept in, couldn't have been be kind of what I'm realizing, and I feel there's a resonance here, is that maybe if I would have woken up 2 hours earlier, I would have seen something that would have made my day less energetic or whatever. So it's not about just making it faster, sometimes it's just about settling into yourself and connected to what's pulling you forward.
You need the introversion. You need the sleep. You need the dream. You need. It's the same thing. It's sort of going there and doing it. At some point, what are you doing? So you need to retract.
And it just be, like from the doing to the being.
Yeah.
Doobie.
I keep forgetting that one.
I love it. I tell you, you'll see it. You'll find it around so many places because I've been spreading it around. You're always quoted.
I don't think it's from me, really.
I learned it from you, so.
Okay. To be or not to be.
Doobie.
Doobie.
So coming back to. Now I'm not even interviewing anymore. I'm just asking for help.
Okay. Yeah, you were on the educational thing.
Yeah, that's where you work with the teachers and you work with the parents, and what are you working towards? Because what I'm at right now, and I don't know if it's defeatist or not, or if I'm just lowering the bar. But what I'm at right now is these kids that we're working with, this generation, if we could get them to not raise other generation like they've been raised.
Yeah. In a way, I'm thinking of something else. I don't know if it'll help, but I'm thinking what's lacking in for teachers today is to spend more time between teachers. In other words, if you design something that will get teachers to educate themselves, you will be modeling for them what they need to do for the kids. So the problem of training teachers today is not train them to do something different with the kids, but it's to create the architecture where they interact with each other 10 times more and learn from each other 10 times more.
Yeah.
Maybe bringing some new skills and stuff like that, but where basically the message is they need to grow as a community. Okay, so it's creating a community development architecture where it's only teachers for teachers, where they need to learn skills and so on. And from that, they will get the idea that their role is to do the same thing with kids. In other words, give them an architecture where they'll do the same thing that what they did with each other.
Yeah. And this makes a lot of sense.
And they'll learn how to deal with adults.
That's the main thing, because their interaction during the day is 90% with 20 kids.
And there's not enough interaction between teachers. I would say, for instance, meetings between teachers and all the time between teachers is probably not conducive to their development as teachers.
I'm putting concrete examples on what you're saying, and it's exactly the way it is. They're the only meetings they have. They're purely administrative and very kind of structured and whatever. So They don't have the opportunity to develop together, and that's why they don't have the competency of creating that space for others.
For kids to develop together.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Close the circle. Is thinking about silence now. You know? I'm not creative by thinking about silence. It's pretty, but I think it's also about relationship and coming back to that in a way. It's probably you're one of the persons which I feel less awkward sitting in silence with. So, most of the people when I sit in silence, there's a silence moment, I will go like, okay, when I see. So with you, I don't get that feeling. You know, I'm much more comfortable in silence. Also because you've trained me on that, like you're training us on silence from the beginning. But also because there's this space that you mentioned in the training, but I feel now maybe it's just a phase in my time. It's really important that space between two people, you know. And again, I feel it's a lot about trust. So in order to create that space, you need to trust what I don't know.
Well, trust yourself, I guess, or trust the context, whatever is going to come up.
That's the hardest part when I explain. I think I got that from you. You know, this idea of trust, and when you sleep in, trust that it's okay. Don't beat yourself up about it. And when I talk to people about this, some people which are really close to me and I get along with on a lot of other subjects, I just blank on this. What do you mean trust what? I don't know, God. Fuck it, man. What do God? I do believe in God, but what's to trust here? And it's so hard for me to kind of relate to people on that because it's. And again, I think it's just so easy. It's just trust. I mean, just let it go.
It's probably also training. As people haven't been trained to be silent, or to be alone, or to, like we said, it's not so much an introverted culture. You have to be doing. And if you're okay with your own silence, then you can share it. If you're wondering, okay, now what's the next thing to do? Where do I go from here? It's to fill in the gaps. If you know how to do nothing, with yourself, just sit there and sort of contemplate. It's probably easier for Eastern cultures, but they're losing it.
Yeah.
Traditional Eastern culture, which is to be the Buddha, sit under the same tree for the longest time. Maybe we need to stop this.
Oh, you're outside. There's literally people on the street. Well, I think they'll pass through. This brought me to another thing. It'll be funny. So, I don't know if I told you about this I'm okay with it being on camera. LSD trip, no, I'll cut that part out and I'll say psychedelic trip that I did recently, and it came to me because of the silence being broken by this, you know. So what was happening during the LSD trip? It was a guided trip, and it kind of took a healing type of atmosphere, and people were just expressing emotions that they had for a long time, and so on and so forth. But there was this dance and this balance between being very seriously accompanying somebody in their own expression of what they were going through, which was traumatic, and then switching to just joking about you know, physical stuff, and getting in a really kind of a guy group atmosphere. But then we would switch back. You would be present, and you would see somebody pulling out of that circle of humor and starting going into himself, you know. And and you would need the whole group to be there for the person that was expressing this.
This is during the trip? Or?
During the trip.
Yeah, okay.
So this was the trip. The main part of the trip was about this, you know. And what was fascinating was that the dance itself made the most sense. So the idea of going back and forth between joking and being really, you know,
between the surface and diving,
exactly,
and
diving,
surface
exactly,
and, you know.
exactly. And I brought it up during the trip, and the guy who was managing the trip or whatever, in the center of the trip, he said that going up is just our way of not staying deep and not being with our emotions and so forth. I don't challenge that completely because he has way more experience than I do, but my feeling is that you need to do that.
No.
I mean, it's about that. It's not about being deep or being, you know, it's not about the drama of it or the ways you can interpret it. And it's not about just sitting there and, you know, it's about, that's my kind of take on it.
I don't know. The image that's coming for me is from snorkeling or diving. Yeah, I used to do this a long time ago, which is really, you know, go up for air, hyperventilate, etc., and then dive. And dive, you could go very deep, but you need to come back for air. And not too late, because or else you drown. You know? And of course you could stretch it, and you could go deeper and deeper, and then over time, you know, I'll learn how to go. At one point, I was going down 30 meters, which, you know, like a building. But I always had to come back for air.
We're happy. We're all happy you did, you know.
So,
yeah,
you know, in a way, there may be this ideal. It becomes ideology, which is that movie, the Deep Blue. I don't know if you heard, but the guy goes down and doesn't come up. In other words, that's sort of the ideal. Is really join that other dimension and stay there. But that would mean, you know, you died to this other reality. How do you come back if you don't, you know, come back in a way? You know? So it's making a choice. And in a way, we could say that our whole discussion today is, you know, if I had developed more on the outside and stayed on the breathing dimension, I would have never gone diving that deep. So.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you need to come out for air because.
But you do need to come out for air because that's life. You know? So I did have to make a business and respond, you know, and made sure I invoiced and did my accounting, and you know, it's not my strong point. You know, today I'm luckily surrounded by a lot of people that support me for the accounting and sales and following up on the billing, and you know, but I'm really unstructured for this. It's kind of like an artist needs a good impresario, you know, so as to become a really good artist. But and in a way, that's the function Janina has, my wife. She's really, you know, taking care of all the structure and so on and so forth, making sure that things are clean on the outside with the administration, with this, with that. So I can dive.
Yeah. Yeah. About this, you know, about having people around you to help and stuff. When I first interacted with your work and what you were teaching, first conclusion based on my own experience was, oh, so you just need to get, you know, delegate and, you know, delegate responsibility. I'm good. I'm just an observer and everybody needs to handle shit and I'm just here. And the more we talked and I got into it, I found that this delegation of stuff, right, of stuff that brings with itself a kind of a responsibility to focus on other stuff, to kind of hold the space, to stuff that other people are not usually doing, and maybe, and I don't know. I guess my question is, do you feel the same way, or does this? So, does the idea of focusing on your research and getting so much out of experience with clients and so on, it forces you in a way to delegate a lot of the administrative stuff, right? So the amplitude dimensions. But does it bring any type of other responsibility? Do you feel like you're, for example, responsible in a different way than Janina is for your work together or whatever?
It's funny because we had I had an awareness, which is my accountant sort of jokingly calls me boss, you know, patron and so on, and yeah, I'm the owner, and but I'm actually the only producer. In other words, Janina's in sales and she's into accounting and somebody's, you know, doing the administration. It's like functional jobs. I'm actually the factory. You know, so I told her she shouldn't call me boss. She should call me employee. And I need to have a union, you know, to defend my rights. In other words, by calling me boss, she's only looking at parts. She's putting me up there. And I do feel a responsibility of producing, because or else they don't have anything to sell or anything to charge or any accounting to do. You know, so I have to keep the machine moving. Being the main factory in the system, you know, all over the place, because they chose not to have other employees. So the fact that they refer to me as boss is profoundly, I would say, limiting, considering my role in the organization. Because if there wasn't another worker, I mean, if I wasn't doing the work, the factory job every day, there'd be no need for the boss. Now, another thing I was thinking when you were talking about it is actually they're completely also in tune. With the purpose of what we're doing. In other words, they have all done some of the training, the workshops, and they feed me with indicators. You know, and they tell me about, you know, this participant, this happened, etc., because a lot of the indicators don't only happen with me, but happen with the people around. They actually talk a lot with each of the people that I work with, or with their administration. In other words, when Carmen has to charge, and get in contact with other administrators, it shows exactly what the company does. It shows what the system is about.
They do it. Yeah.
So we're actually a working system that works with systems, and they have to be on board. They can't just do things that are completely contradictory.
Yeah.
I get all the official mail in France, especially not here because it's in Romanian, so it's useless. But everything that is sent to the company email, etc., I get a copy. So I usually see, etc. I don't do anything with it. Sometimes my assistant in France, what happened recently, she was in Indonesia visiting volcanoes, and there's no connection or anything. And the client says, I didn't get a response on this. So immediately I jumped in because it's kind of like an airline. We're all double checking each other. Things don't go to just one person. There's two, and the first one to react on different things. We know our position, so I won't react to things if I know she's reacting and so on. And sometimes I'll react first, or I'll react and she'll say, I already answered, so I got 2 answers, which is great. But we are actually just-in-time systems. We all show the client that we're working in a certain way. Everybody's
practicing what you're preaching.
Everybody is wowed because if they ask something in the company, they practically sometimes have the answer in the next hour. Even if it's for next month or next year, it's just in and out. And that actually illustrates to the customer that we function in a completely different way. We don't have to sell it. We don't have to explain it.
That's it.
It's there.
You see it.
So it's not as if I'm doing things and I delegate to the organization something else. It's more like we're all doing the same thing.
Shared responsibility, shared core responsibility.
In terms of process. Now, in terms of content, obviously, I don't write any of the bills, etc., but we're all in the flow together.
Yes, it's something that you could feel on the other side, and it's again, it's the best way to sell what you're doing is by doing it and validating.
And I follow up on steps. I mean, I just finished something. Everything is clear in the contract and so on, but I'll tell the assistant, okay, you can send the invoice. And at one point I forgot, and she says, you didn't tell me if I could send the invoice. In other words, she's always looking for fine indicators from me and me from her of how we need to adjust as a system so as to really serve the clients well. And not only well, but with pertinence, considering the type of relationship the client is instilling or provoking. So we're more like a body.
Organism than it's funny how there's your work and then there's a whole different array of work being done by, I don't know, consultants or in the software developing community, mainly in the States, but also in Singapore and so forth. They're going exactly towards what you are already doing, and they're putting. They each have their own systems and names and methods and whatever, but they're basically saying the same thing. It's an organism. You see the organization as an organism, not so much as a mechanism, and but have this constant co-responsibility and communication.
And I would say what's the most important is sort of a common kind of purpose, vision,
Yeah.
you know, a philosophy, religion, different words for it. We need to be in the same type of wavelength. It's not necessarily on the details of this action or that action or who does what. There's an underlying underlying energy that actually structures the rest.
Yeah, and the rest emerges from
Yeah.
there. So, talking about small bladders and hydration.
Yes.
I need to
It's
break.
time for a break. Yes.